Welcome to Promethean Action's weekly class for September 20th, 2025 with Brian Lantz. Can we provide housing for our young families? It's one of many issues which takes on a deeper aspect after Charlie Kirk's assassination because it's a profound moral issue. Can we provide the circumstances for healthy family life for young Americans? Not only so that we can ensure the existence of a next generation of Americans, but their moral health, their mental health, raised up in intact families. Major question before the country. So with that, let me bring on Brian Lantz, who has written so much about this and related questions.
Good evening. Good to be here with everyone. And we'll get right to it here. President Trump said that the only thing that will bring us together is success. And in terms of the upcoming Supreme Court decision on tariffs, he said the economy will take off like a rocket if successful. Now, tomorrow is the funeral services for Charlie Kirk, and 2 plane loads of Trump administration officials, including the president, are flying in to Phoenix for those services where Charlie Kirk will be laid to rest. And I don't want to belabor that. I want to move to something that Charlie Kirk and really the entire Turning Point movement has been committed to, which is we've got to solve the problems of homes, as Tony just mentioned, of homes and healthcare for our young Americans. We've got to build out rapidly real, affordable, beautiful homes for our young families across the country. And I'll come back to a few things that Charlie Kirk specified in terms of why that's so critical now, right now. And I want to emphasize it in terms of the 2026 presidential elections. Solving the health care and what I'll deal with tonight, the housing crisis. This can be and should be the spear point in the 2026 elections to elect a supermajority for President Trump and his allies for the American people. A supermajority in the House and the Senate, and the mobilization of young people, young Americans who were so instrumental in the presidential election of 2024 to lead that effort, to lead that organizing effort, to transform U.S. policy on housing would be absolutely critical. So Charlie Kirk had a few things to say about this, but I also want to say right from the outset, we've done this before. We've solved the housing crisis in the United States before, and I'm going to come to that very quickly. But briefly, Charlie Kirk in his interview on July 22nd. On the Tucker Carlson show, it was really more of a dialogue, had some extremely important things to say about this. He started out in terms of affordable housing and all that surrounds that. He said, so there's a race against the clock that's happening right now. And I think President Trump is uniquely suited to fix it. He has to fix it, which is, can we reorder economic reality for the under 30s before dark political radicalization sets in. And of course, the discussion goes on from there, and he emphasizes that there's a political radicalization that you see with for example, the New York mayoral campaign of Zohan Mandami, where the socialist is now leading in the mayoral race. But he says, look, people miss the deeper what that actually indicates on a deeper level, that this is an economic distress signal. Charlie Kirk emphasized there's an economic distress signal being sent out here. So I won't go into details. He develops what's happened with buy now, pay later, not the form that we knew of it from decades ago, but in terms of Klarna and Affirm and Afterpay, each of them, which has tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue now, which is Charlie uses the example, Mr. Kirk uses the example, of paying off a pizza over 4 payments. Anything can be split up. And this is capturing a growing, it's becoming like a cancer, particularly among young people, because of their lack of resources, the increasing unaffordability, and housing is part of this. He refers to it as a credit-centric renter economy, right? And that it's a political volcano, as reflected in the Mandami, New York mayoral race. So I want to just underscore this, and you can go to the slide. It'll be the second slide, I think, there. The first slide after the kind of cover slide for the series, Tony. I want to go to this in terms of a U.S. Census information graphic. This is from 1973 to 2023. And the green or blue, however it comes out on your screen, is 1973, and 2023 is the yellow. And you see there at the top, age distribution of owners, that is owners of households. And you see this number, of course, you see that it starts out slow and then climbs to a peak around the mid 40s, 50s, and then of course drops off demographically. But notice the shift from where it was in 1973 and where it is by 1923 in terms of a shift to an increasingly older population in household demographics. Fewer and fewer people own households, while the opposite is occurring in terms of rentals. So that's just a snapshot comparing 1973 to 2023. That's 50 years shift. The unaffordability of housing is very real, even in terms of U.S. Census figures. But continuing on in terms of this shift, which is, in terms of median age, is a shift from 31 years, the average median age for buying a home, to 41 years. This is radical in terms of its effect on family formation, the lack of it, of raising children. By the time you're in your 40s, you're almost out of the age of starting a family. So I just want to emphasize that, and then Charlie Kirk poses the question, particularly to boomers, particularly to conservatives, why is it that the right is so blind to the suffering of young people that just gave us the U.S. Senate majority? I'm quoting him on that. This was July 22nd, just a couple of months ago. And he emphasizes, look, people that own nothing, that feel like their property is diminishing, they don't have property or their dollar is diminishing in value, they start to look for alternatives. And so the political project in front of us, this is Charles Kirk. And so the political project in front of us as conservatives should be, how do we actually de-radicalize the country in the next couple of years? That's my obsession. Now, so I'm setting the stage. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, just a matter of weeks ago, in an interview said that the administration is considering declaring a housing emergency in the fall. And I think that's on the table. And so this is a singular task. While we mop up Antifa and clean out these terrorist networks, including the higher ups that orchestrate them through foundations and so forth. A singular task we have is to mobilize the American people, thinking people, ahead of the 2026 elections, to address this really substantive issue before the country, housing. So I'm going to outline how that can be done. You can take down that slide, Tony. First of all, there's a lot of proposals out there. I'll just quickly mention a few for a reason. There's the Renew Opportunity in the American Dream. That's ROAD, Road to Housing Act, that came out of the U.S. Senate. It's a mishmash of every attempt to nibble away at the housing crisis, but it provides no substantial resources. I'll just leave it there. There's the talk of, and it's much of it's reasonable, that there corporate buying of households, of single family homes should be outlawed. That we should tax the hell out of housing speculators. That equity funds, of course, should not be able to buy and flip homes, and much less sit on them and rent them, and gouge people with ever higher rental rates. A first-time home buyer tax credit, is floated. Even a upfront $25,000 towards the down payment for first-time homeowners, and so on and so forth. A capital gains tax elimination on home sales to encourage more home sales, so more homes would be available for young people. More importantly, for the purposes here, Robert Kennedy Jr., when he was running for president, some of you may remember this, proposed bringing back 3% mortgage rates. Bringing back, that's a key word here. Bringing back because we had them before. Bringing back 3% mortgage rates for first-time homeowners. That a federal agency would sell bonds to raise money to help finance this. And of course, the mortgages would be paid off. And a 3% mortgage, she said, would lower, the monthly payments on a 30-year mortgage by $1,000 a month. Not unsubstantial at all. Now, also, the One Big Beautiful Bill has, also keep in mind what Robert Kennedy Jr. Proposed, just in the back of your mind. But the One Big Beautiful Bill, just passed by the Trump administration and supported by Robert Kennedy Jr., also included important, not inconsequential elements, putting more money in the pocket of working families, the no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. These and other measures the child increase in the child tax credit, and so forth. These are important, significant. There's also more abstractly, perhaps, there's the permanent mortgage insurance tax deduction. In other words, buying a home with a mortgage, you have to pay mortgage insurance currently. Under the new law, that can be deducted from your taxes. Anyway, so there's a number of these things. Again, these are small steps, but important, particularly in terms of putting more money in the pockets of our wage earners, our blue collar wage earners and their families. And affordability, affordability is the essential issue in terms of the whole economy. We've got to make things more affordable again, just to emphasize that. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have policies called Home Ready and Home Possible, but this helps. It helps thousands of people, low income people, buy a home, but it's merely thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. And of course, President Trump has proposed building on federal lands, because obviously you can make federal lands available at a inexpensive or free price, essentially, for development of homes. But also, I would add, actually, some studies show that there's more state and local government lands held near small and medium and large cities that could be utilized for home building, not for tiny houses and this kind of nonsense, but real affordable single family homes we're talking about here. We're not trying to cut corners here. We've got to address the real problem. But there's a big question here. Maybe it's already nagging you in the back of your mind. For example, you can bring down mortgage costs. You could do that. We could do that. And we need to do that. It's a major reason that President Trump and his administration, Bill Pulte and so forth, over at the FHFA, are pounding on Jerome Powell and the Fed to bring down interest rates substantially now. But critically, if all you do is increase the number of mortgages that can be written, and you therefore empower more people to buy homes, will that just drive the cost of housing up? There's, the housing, we have to address the question of building homes. We've got to build millions of homes. Some people say 5 million, shortage 7 million. Charlie Kirk himself called the other day for 20 million homes in that Tucker interview on July 22nd. 20 million homes are required. It's in that range. We definitely need them. We also have deteriorating old homes we've got to replace. I mean, homes don't last forever. We have so you have a reference point. We have about 85 million single-family homes, occupied single-family homes in the United States today. So for reference. So regardless, we're talking about large millions of homes. And that's what we've got to address, as well as bringing down the cost of mortgages. So I'm going to suggest what can be done. And I want to just emphasize, to start with, a key concept. The key concept here, and many are already familiar with this in these classes, is the distinction, between the price and the value, between productive, which is a question of value, and that aspect that's non-productive, which may be the price. But it's also in terms of activity, the distinction between productive activity in the sense of promoting the general welfare over looking to future generations, the long arc, versus the short-term quick buck kind of mentality that's dominated and brought us to this crisis. We have to look in terms of our policy making now from the standpoint of that concept of productive investment, productive activity, and promoting it. And the question of affordable homes, affordable, new, beautiful homes for young families is absolutely an essential element. As Tony indicated at the offset of this broadcast, it's a question of creating the conditions for family formation, moral, cultural, the development of young children, safety, security. All of these are features. Moving to a single payer household again, where a single paycheck can support a family. These are essential preconditions for a productive society, for a society that can build towards tomorrow and for the future generations. So we've got to marshal our resources. We've got to steer our resources in this fashion. It's not going to happen leaving it to the flea market, which is now, BlackRock and, all of these others. It won't happen. And I'll come back to, if there's time, to, Horton and Lennar and these big, huge home building companies as well. That's definitely not the solution. So what I'm going to talk about now, I'm going to turn to the Federal Home Loan Bank, FHLB or FHL Bank. You probably have never heard of it, or at most vaguely, but it's an extremely important institution to understand in terms of expanding lending to the entire U.S. housing sector, in terms of home building sector. The FHLB, the Federal Home Loan Bank, has made, still makes low-cost loans in advance as advances into housing for mortgages, but also into home building. It's a network. It's 11 different districts, and with 11 regional cooperative banks. They're owned by, each of those cooperative banks is a non-federal government. It's a private institution. It's owned by its members, which are other financial institutions that own stock into it. And these companies that own stock into it all issue mortgages to one degree or to another. At least 10% of their lending is for mortgages to even qualify to join. And they buy in, and they pay in, and they place deposits there and so forth. And this system is operating in the United States. It has assets of about $750 billion today, but there's a whole backstory to this. And I want to get to that very quickly. If you will, you can put up the next slide for people, Tony. This is just a quick map, just to give you a kind of visual sense of the FHL Bank system. And it's 11 districts, including in Hawaii and Alaska, and where their headquarters are. So the FHLB system, Federal Home Loan Bank system, originated to stabilize the savings and loans, or what were known as thrifts or home loan associations, back in the 1930s. The FHLB system was created to basically shepherd the entire savings and loan system. People recall savings and loans. There's still about 500 of them around the country today. Savings and loans, which is where people put their savings in to these savings and loans or home loans associations. They had grown up organically around the country, but in the collapse of the Depression, 1929 Depression and on, these home loan associations started going bankrupt. And so the FHLB was created to save them, and they reorganized them. And by 1950, there was 8,000 of them. And so this was shepherded, as I'm using that term, I think it's at least appropriate, to building up the savings and loan industry across the United States. Actually 8,000 by 1940. But so let's concentrate then on what happened after World War II. Well, after World War II, there was a massive housing shortage. We don't think about it today, but a little reflection, we can imagine why. Because of the war effort, men being abroad, the mobilization of a surge capacity for the arsenal of democracy. There had been an accumulated housing shortage from the Depression years of the 1930s and then onward with the lack of new housing, as there were immediate priorities that had to be dealt with in terms of the national security of the nation. And so what was unleashed then was the Federal Home Loan Bank system was unleashed to finance a massive expansion of home building across the United States. They weren't, you can put up the next slide, Tony, they weren't exactly the homes we would imagine today, but this was a 1950s dream home in Florida, for example. Pretty small, couple bedrooms, pretty small bedrooms, a carport. You get the idea. But the idea was a massive expansion of housing. The savings and loans, utilizing funds provided by the Federal Home Loan Banks system, advances of money, expanded their writing of mortgages, but they also finance home builders, and including a large number of new home builders, made up of men coming home from the war. Went into this business. They saw the opportunity. They saw the need. 5 million between 1945 and 1960. But that's only a portion. That 5 million, think of that in terms of the housing shortage today. 5 million were built in that period of 15 years. Okay? But actually, 20 million were built between 1945 and 1970. What was spurred by the FHLB, by savings loans, was cumulatively and by other means as well, resulted in a total build out of the housing stock of the United States by 20 million homes. We did that. And then that was a bigger percentage of the housing stock. By 1970, we had about 63 million single family homes. So 20 million were built. In fact, we doubled the housing stock of the United States between 1935 roughly and 1970. We doubled the entire housing stock of the United States. This also meant that we grew the number of builders, home builders, the home industry. This is not just the framing of a house. This is the trades in terms of plumbing, carpentry, of course, but plumbing, electricians, stonemasonry, roofing, all of this was, these trades expanded in the context of this tremendous lending through the savings and loans from the Federal Home Loan Bank, credit expansion, their advancements, as they call them still today. Just to cut to the quick here, the mortgage rates for a veteran, the down payment that a veteran had to pay for he and his family to buy a new home was 0 down payment. The interest rate was 3%. A little more broadly, in terms of the FHA, it was the down payment was 10% max, roughly 10%, as opposed to 20% today at much higher cost per home, obviously. And the interest rate was roughly 4%, between 4 and 5%. So this was affordable. It was cheaper to buy a home than to rent it. That was the circumstances we created in this country. Cheaper to buy than rent. That was that had real meaning at the time in terms of homes for young families. So home ownership increased from 20% by 20 percentiles between 1940 and 1960. It went from 43%, of course, this includes farms and so on, from 43% to 62%. 62% in 1960, just 15 years after the end of World War II. So this was an enormous process. It continued. In 1972, housing construction peaked. In 1972, 2.5 million homes were started. Construction on them was started. And virtually all of them would have been completed within a year. So, or 2 or 3. So this, I hope this gives you some idea. You can move on to the next slide here. Of course, this included, Levittowns. There's, I think, 6 of them built. The first one was in Rhode Island. And these homes were snapped up within 24 hours. $7,900 to buy a home. And that could be, as I said, was 0 down if you were a veteran, or 10% down. About $7,900, that's $790 is 10% down. And keep in mind, there was the enormous housing shortage. That was the need in terms of the new families being formed after World War II. And there's various features to Levittown that are fun to look at. They had an assembly line approach and so on and so forth. And every house included a white picket fence if requested, a green lawn, and modern appliances. That was all included in the house and in the cost. But the first 1,400 houses there in Levittown were purchased within 3 hours. But they were also small. They didn't have a basement. They didn't have a garage. They didn't have a patio. But this is where we started out. And then if you move on to the next slide, Levitt and Sons, that built Levittown, they quickly upgraded to offer a wider variety of homes, styles, and so on and so forth. But this was a feature of the home building process. But I don't want to overemphasize Levittown, but I just want to, just recognize it as well. But this included hundreds of thousands of home builders across the United States. In home building, in a nutshell, there's virtually no advantages of scaling up in terms of home building. The cost of building a home is about the same, whether it's a large home or a large home building company or a small team, a couple of guys, if they know the skills and subcontract well, their costs are going to be roughly the same. The only advantage to a Horton or a Lennar or other regional builders is they can build them quick, and they have the power of size. They can get a better deal, not only on terms of materials, but they can squeeze their subcontractors. The large home builders today, mentioning D.R. Horton and Lennar, they're the biggest. They don't build their own homes. They supervise them. They oversee it as the general contractor, but the homes are built by subcontractors, and those subcontractors are squeezed. And this is, and a feature of this, of course, is the fact that, for example, in Texas, it's estimated that at least 25% of the people in the housing, home building, working for these subcontractors are unauthorized people. They're illegal. They have been illegal. And they have even fewer rights in terms of the conditions of home building. So that's a little bit of a digression. But today, well, let's look at this question. How is the FHL bank itself financed? Where did this money come from that the FHL bank advanced? Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, the FHL bank system with 11 regional self-owned banks owned by their members. Those banks members pay in, they buy stock in the district bank. Further, they're required to put a certain amount of equity into the bank as a percentage of the mortgages they have outstanding. It's a very small percentile, but it adds up. They also, and importantly, the FHL bank system raises money by selling its own consolidated obligation bonds. It sells bonds in the market. It's separate from the federal financing bank. It's separate from other entities in terms of the federal government. It has its own financing agency that it totally owns, and it sells into the market. And who can buy those bonds? Virtually anything, anybody. Central banks from other countries, investors from other countries, U.S. insurance companies, the federal government agencies can buy bonds in the Federal Home Loan Bank. The U.S. Treasury buys bonds in the Federal Home Loan Bank, buys bonds, therefore giving liquidity to the FHL bank. In fact, during the 2007-2009 financial crash, the Treasury was authorized by the Congress to provide unlimited money from the U.S. Treasury as required by the Federal Home Loan Bank, to buy bonds from the Federal Home Loan Bank. And of course, those bonds were paid off and so forth. So just to emphasize, pension funds, corporations. This is another area where the Trump administration, for example, could steer foreign and domestic investors into the Federal Home Loan Bank to build a modern day equivalent in terms of a national home building program. They could do that. Now, who makes up the Federal Home Loan Bank? Who are these entities that buy in as stockholders, if you will, as members? They're members of their home loan bank, their district bank. Well, as I said, in the day, it was savings and loans. And there were, as I said, 8,000 of those savings and loans in 1950. Today, there's 500. The Federal Reserve policies destroyed the savings and loan sector in the 1980s. So we have 500 left. But that's not the end of the story. Today, the Federal Home Loan Bank now has a membership that includes regional and local commercial banks, which make up particularly local banks, community banks, make up the majority, 60% of all the members of the system as a whole in these 11 district banks. But it also can include larger commercial banks. There's a couple of them. PNC out of Pittsburgh is one of them. Key Bank, I think that's out of Florida. Anyway, a couple of larger, not the largest, but the are happen to be members. And so credit unions are members of the Federal Home Loan Bank. So the membership today, about 6,500 today, is exactly these local institutions embedded in communities across the United States that know the local needs, the local requirements, and can take advantage of new advances, large advances of resources to finance home building on the one side and finance the mortgages of the buyers on the other side on terms that can meet the requirement, that can be managed by young families. And I want to emphasize then another feature of this, of course, this is so elementary, is that if we build millions of homes, we are going to bring the price of homes down. The market for housing in the United States will begin to deflate. We'll take the speculative advantage, first of all, out of existing housing, out of this real, horrendous, predatory process that's been underway over recent decades in terms of escalating home prices. We'll take the air out of that, particularly, if we're combining it with the utilization of federal, state, and local lands, just to add that as an element. Not that that's going to be the critical element, but it can be a key element because you want to bring land prices down. Land prices add $25,000 minimally, usually more like $100,000 or more. Now, of course, it can be much more in certain areas, to the cost of a home. Just the preparation of the land, putting in the basic infrastructure. A builder has to connect to power. There's got to be sewer lines. There's got to be water lines. To put in that infrastructure, it used to be financed by cities and counties, but more and more, it's the only infrastructure that gets built is by these big subdivisions, by the big regional and national home builders who build the subdivisions themselves, including paying for the transformers, buying the transformers to connect their subdivisions. And that adds increasingly to the cost of housing tremendously. So the post-war housing boom that I've just, summarized can be built out again, utilizing community and regional banks across the United States and the existing savings and loans that still exist, the 500 or so. This can be this can work. And of course, there could be additional financial institutions of this sort, of this very practical, real sort, that build out our commercial banking system in the United States, taking a power away from a few money-centered banks, which is really a cartel system. The Housing Act of 1949, the FHA system, the veteran system, these were all additional components in the 1940s, 1950s that contributed to the FHL bank system's effectiveness, to the savings and loan system's effectiveness. For example, insurance. Insurance was provided. It wasn't an add-on that you had to pay insurance was provided by the FHA, the Federal Housing Authority. That was its main purpose, was to provide insurance on mortgages. This is what allowed the savings and loans, as well as the builders, to know that the buyers could actually buy the homes, and if something went wrong, it would be covered, so they could risk their capital. This is very important, the risking of capital into the home building sector. To lower those risks means that you're bringing down the cost. You're making more affordable the building of homes. Today, a home builder, a contractor, pays roughly 7% interest on up, 7 to 9% interest if he's an established home builder, but it can go up to 15 or 20% interest to get a loan so that he can build a line of credit so that he can build a house. Now, he's only charged for the part of the loan that he's drawing upon at any point along the lines as he's building the house. He's drawing on that line of credit to complete the house, from the foundation to the framing, to the cabinet works, roofing, and so on and so forth. Along that way, he's drawing on this line of credit. He's only paying the full amount at the end of the line after he's completed the home, which has completed his draw on the line of credit. Well, what if he sits there? What if he sits there and can't sell? Just to move on in terms of the slides, go to the next slide. And this underscores this. Look at this zig and zag up and down. I've used this slide before. This is from the Federal Reserve. This is the zig and zag in the starts. The starts, the actual beginning, of a new home. They're registered with the local authorities, county, city, whatever. They're registered. That data is gathered. And so there's annual figures on the number of housing starts. And you see this zig and zag. And look, I call your attention, look back to a peak back in 1972 or so, in terms of the number of units. This is in thousands. So there was over 2,400,000 houses started in 1972, 73, right? As measured here, right? But this is the peak in housing construction coming out of that boom created post 1945. And then look at the fall off in terms of that period from roughly 1972, 73 down into 1975, the collapse of housing construction. That was the oil hoax. That was the oil embargo. And what did the Fed do at that point? They jacked interest rates from around 6% up to 10% and then higher, I think 13, 14% in just a short period of time, within a year or two, to quote unquote control inflation. This goes back to the point I introduced earlier, the distinction between productive and non-productive investment. If you had a sane management of monetary policy under the Constitution, under the principle of the general welfare, and we've had this system in the past, as with Hamilton, as with Lincoln, as with Roosevelt and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and so forth. You distinguish between productive and non-productive. You don't ramp up high interest rates and say, okay, we're going to stop inflation by killing everybody, by destroying the economy. You take the air out of the bubble. You stop speculative investment. You contract credit into the non-productive service sector, for example. You don't do it all at once, but you manage over time so you don't have these peaks and troughs. So you have a stable environment that promotes stable investment in productive activity, as opposed to speculative activity that plays on these ups and downs, that preys on it, shorts it or goes long. This is the commodity speculation, you name it. This is the insanity of the Federal Reserve System in terms of its imposition on the U.S. economy over generations. And then look forward to, of course, 2007. You see this huge drop off from 2007 down to roughly 2010. And as with the earlier period, you have also the massive bankruptcy of home builders. In the period of the 2007-2009 crash, we lost half of our home builders. Half of them. They went out of business. Whether they went bankrupt or just closed their doors, they were gone. We built some back since, but not a lot. This overall process is what's stopped us, prevented us from building the kind of housing stock we need in a growing country, with a growing population. We need a growing stock of single-family homes. So I hope I've given you a sense of it. There's more details that could be gone through. Not all savings and loan members were members of the Federal Home Loan Bank system. About half of them were, and I grew to more than half of them. But that's, but this was the environment in which the entire home building industry was operating, and mortgages were being written for the country. And I spoke briefly in terms of this question of developers and big builders versus small builders. I think I've said enough on that again. But look, one thing that will not work, I mean, this is my personal view, but I think it stands the test. Something that will not work is single-wide mobile homes. That is not the future of home building in the United States. Okay? For Scott Turner, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, I like Scott Turner, but for him to have to stand out there on the Capitol Mall, promoting at the so-called Innovative Housing Showcase, the fact that Fannie and Freddie Mac will now finance single-wide mobile homes. They're now called manufactured homes, but it's mobile homes. They're not on a permanent foundation. The type of homes that will blow away in a hurricane, or blow away in, Tornado Alley. This is not the future of home building in the United States. Rightfully, Lyndon LaRouche referred to these mobile home parks as modern day Hoovervilles, and that was decades ago. So we got to be serious here in terms of solving the home building problem from the standpoint of building millions of modern, affordable, single-family homes of more than 1,400 square feet, that with 3 or 4 bedrooms, etc. That's what we've got to build out. That's what we've got to be committed to doing. Modular homes, this is being developed, where you build them in factories to a large extent. You assemble them on a site, but they go onto a permanent foundation. That absolutely can be part of the picture. That's something that's going to have to be sorted out. And so forth. So now I'm wrapping up here. Just a couple of things. I just want to, just as a breather, I want to shift back to the big picture. When we're undergoing hybrid warfare, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the leader of Turning Point USA, has caught Americans, not only by surprise, but shocked them. And it's awakened a recognition of how deeply we've been submerged into a controlled environment of pessimism and the rest. The Trump administration, President Trump and his team, including in the private sector, are building intent on building the United States out from under that, tearing away that hybrid warfare structure. And we've been covering that on Promethean Action in detail with the first 15-minute updates by Barbara Boyd and Susan Kokenda. And this is this is also what Lee Zeldin over at the Environmental Protection Act is about. With the repeal of the endangerment finding, of 2008. That was under the Obama administration, the EPA's endangerment finding that determined that there were six greenhouse gases. And the rest was history in terms of the destruction of significant energy and industry potential in the United States. It was part of this hybrid warfare, put us into a controlled environment that we're breaking out now. We're breaking out of that. This is also Burgum over the Secretary of the Interior, Chris Wright over the Secretary of Transportation. So we're committed to it. So the economy, we should be learning this. I hope it's clear. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir a bit here, but we got to be serious. The economy is not to be taken for granted. The local Republican clubs around the United States, community organizations have got to discuss the policies we need to adopt as a nation. We can fund the Federal Home Loan Bank as, for example, a mechanism to proliferate home building across the United States. Affordable, but competently built home building. We can rebuild the home building industry in terms of proliferating contractors. These subcontractors that are now forced to work for the large national and regional home building companies. Those contractors can spin off and become home builders on their own. Home building has always been a stepping stone into the skilled trades. Starting off from basic framing and foundation work on up. It's been an area in which we've grown and developed our workforce over past generations. Home building can be a way for the younger generations to also learn skills and get paid a very decent wage. And just to mention it, it's not unimportant. The building trades unions have the largest apprenticeship program in the United States. So there's an infrastructure there to be built on in that regard as well. But just moving on to the next slide, look, we're a nation. We want circumstances for young families to grow and develop. I'll move to the next slide. We're already, there's a fact, you can learn more in my book, on Amazon, Rebuild the USA, the Trump presidency and beyond. A lot of this is dealt with there, but moving on to the next slide quickly, Tony, look, we're this is the national highway system. We're interconnected. The next slide, please. These are gas transmission and hazardous liquid. That's gas, that's jet fuel, kerosene, etc. These are the pipelines that carries us across the United States. Of course, particularly out of where I am here in the Southwest in Houston, Texas. The next slide. The railroad system. I mean, it's not the greatest. We got a lot of work to do on the U.S. railroad system. But, we're knitted together. This was all being taken apart. This was all being taken apart by the predatory practices under the central banking regime, the Anglo-American cartel, financial cartel, sitting at the top. This was Wall Street policy. This was the policy of the frankly, of the Bushes, of the Carters, the uh, and the rest, the Bidens, the so-called Biden administration, was taking this apart. They didn't succeed. So we have a lot to build on. And we've got some great tasks in front of us. So I hope that's informative. I hope that is encouraging, and certainly looking forward to discussion and questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you. That was extraordinary. Thank you so much.